Good afternoon, everyone. I hope all is well. This is Tim, and this is my submission for assignment 3A. For the purposes of this assignment, I chose to focus my attention on Native American students. This comes from a personal interest in terms of historical context, and also my brother is married to a woman who is Shinnecock Indian, and the culture is really fascinating. So I thought this was a really great opportunity to look into that culture more and discuss it in a higher education context. So when looking at a Native American population, I think terminology number one is important. Looking at this population, you may hear Native American, American Indian. It also includes Alaskan natives. There's a distinction there based on recognition and whatnot from the government. And then what's really critical to understand with Native American populations is the tremendous array of different tribes that exist under this umbrella term of Native American or American Indian, whichever term it is that you prefer to use. Based on the readings for this assignment, it did identify that there are 566 tribal nations that are currently recognized, and this doesn't even include all of them. This doesn't include about 70 that are recognized by local state governments and those kinds of entities. So really, we're talking about a population that, while when we think about underprivileged or underrepresented populations, minority populations, oftentimes I think, especially given circumstances today, we hear about Hispanic or Latina students. You hear about African American. You hear about different minority groups. When Native American students are in some way even larger of a minority group, given that it's not just in the context of their identity as American Indian, but you're looking at these different tribes that exist, and tribal sovereignty is critical to all of these tribes. It's perhaps the most important thing that comes to the forefront when we're talking about what are the values and the importance of our Native American students and our Native American populations as a whole. So looking at sort of the history of these populations, I think everyone at some point growing up has read about the variety of atrocities that essentially have occurred from the beginning of European conquest into the Americas. From the very beginning, these native populations were subject to very horrible experiences, executions, mass being put into bondage, and essentially having some of their cultures begin to be eradicated by predominantly European white settlers. So thinking in that context, now looking at that's sort of pre-United States, pre-America, but once this country was founded, the tumultuous relationship with the Native American population still remained. So thinking about it, even in the 1700s, following the founding of our nation in 1776, when we officially became with the Declaration of Independence, the Naturalization Act of 1790 coming out, less than 15 years after the Declaration of Independence. This essentially said that the Native American population were not considered U.S. citizens. And think about what that means, given that they are the native population of these lands, but they were not considered to be U.S. citizens. Moving forward, another into the early 1800s, the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which essentially allowed the United States government to take land from the various tribes without any form of compensation whatsoever, and force them to move and uplift themselves, uproot their families and their entire tribes, and just take their land without any kind of compensation. And then when we look at the Indian Peace Commission, which was established in 1867, this looked at how American Indians would essentially live in white society. So the idea of assimilating, the idea of essentially forcing Native Americans to become more white and to assimilate into white society versus celebrating the traditions that they've had for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And when we think about Native American culture and look at the value systems and look what's important and how this impacts our Native American students and what they need. Looking at the tribal sovereignty issue initially, so you have these hundreds of different tribes that, while many of them do share some similarities, the language, some of the customs and the traditions, and fill in the blank of whatever different values they may have, are tribe specific. So when we start generalizing the Native American population as a whole, we're really not solving the problem there. You have to look at it on different scope that looks at the various tribes and what their customs and values and what they bring to the table are, so that when you're looking at resources, when you're looking at programming, when you're looking at environments and whatever it may be, that you're taking this into account and you're not painting them with too wide a brush. Similarly, how it may work with Hispanic students versus what the individual customs of their country may be, or African American students or international students. It's more than just simply here's your large group. You have to look a little bit on a more detailed level, essentially, when you're looking at customs and that type of thing. So looking at values, one of the things in the context of higher education is the sort of traditional student view is on individual achievement. It's on individual success. It's on how am I going to have a leg up on someone else? How am I going to make myself marketable? And this idea of individual upward mobility, if you will, versus the Native American culture is very different than that. And this is relatively consistent from tribe to tribe, that their focus is more on the community. They focus on sharing. They focus on cooperation. They are focused on the dynamics of the group. They're focused on preserving the identity and history of the tribe. So this, where now we use terms, they're on their own for the first time, where students are flying the nest. They're leaving home. With Native American culture, it's a very, very different dynamic that exists for many of these students. They are not flying the nest. They are looking for, obviously, a higher education, but many of them will take that back to the tribe, take that back to the family. There's a focus on, when you think about spirituality, there's spiritual healing and the value of the earth. There's a focus on their being versus doing, but being in the moment and identifying your own sense of self and reflection and the relationship between humans and the land, and these types of values that are not what would be sort of the traditional white, if you will, for lack of a better term, a context that often happens with students. You hear, again, the discussion of how am I going to succeed versus the we about it, and that tends to be the context that Native American students are looking through the lens of the community and the tribe. So that's definitely something to consider when dealing with these students and looking at resources that we're putting into place, what services they need, what type of programming they may need, and academic support in classroom delivery and the content that's being delivered in the classroom, and taking all those kinds of things into account. So when we also look at higher education for Native Americans, it was not something that was available for many of them. There were very, very few Native Americans that were enrolling in colleges and universities, simply because when you look at the reservation system, first off, that system in itself is oppressive. It was the idea that they needed to be in their own space. They needed to be contained in some capacity, which in itself, when you think about the impact that can have on an upbringing for a student, sends a somewhat troubling message and an idea that it's us versus the world. So that type of mentality comes into play. But what we began to see was the formation of tribal colleges and universities, where you had institutions that were strictly or specifically for students in the tribe. So classifications being that it needed to have a majority of those students. It needed to be governed somehow by the tribe. It needed to focus on the culture and the values of the tribe versus the traditional sort of subject matter of your sort of quote unquote normal colleges and universities. And these tended to take off. I think at this point there are 37 that are recognized in the United States. So these are in existence. But now what you're seeing more and more of is students going through these tribal colleges and then moving to your traditional institution. So that's another dynamic to keep in mind, where they're coming from and the type of education that's being delivered. And then looking at classroom content, and this is where, when we're talking about services and things that they may need, where just simply what is being taught and how and the language that's being used needs to be thought about when you're dealing with Native American students. And when the case study that's in our multiculturalism on campus book talks about a student who was in a class, and the professor brings up the idea of tribes and the casinos that are on tribal lands and whether or not that is legal, and gambling's illegal in certain states and whatnot. And the opinion of the class is very, we don't really understand they don't have an understanding of the culture, so there wasn't a lot of context by the faculty member brought into that. So without an understanding of the culture and the context in which these things came to be, and the reservation culture and what spawned the development of some of these tribal casinos, it was just sort of a blanket question that was put out there, and students didn't have an understanding of the culture or what influenced it. So these non-Native American students are saying, regardless, gambling's illegal, they're wrong, and it makes that student feel uncomfortable because they understand they're the only Native, so they're not speaking up because they're the only one who really gets the culture, but they don't feel comfortable in the classroom. They don't feel comfortable with their fellow students. They don't feel comfortable with a faculty member, and this creates a very interesting dynamic and negative dynamic for that student who now feels uncomfortable simply because of what's being delivered in the classroom, forgetting any kind of outside programming. So with these students, in terms of what they need for success, something to really think about is educating the faculty and educating the students on the culture if you're bringing these types of discussions into the classroom, so that there's a context, there's an understanding of where it came from, there's an understanding of what it is that made these things come to be, and really the horrific types of experiences that these individuals' ancestors had to go through, and then also what their cultural identity is. From a programmatic standpoint, a student affairs standpoint, I think we have our Black History Month, we have Hispanic Heritage Month, there is a Native American Month, and I think with all of these, we're dedicating a month, but what kind of programming are we really doing? And when we look in the context of Native American culture, can we? I think very few institutions are even skimming the surface of that culture. It means bringing in, tribal members. It means understanding the way that their structure works. That there's sovereignty for each tribe. That there's cooperation between tribes. That there's a real family and communal aspect to it. Bringing in the different traditions, the different different cultures and customs that each tribe may have, and celebrating those. And you have your many institutions, Caldwell being one of them, has a hall of flags of all of the international students who are on campus, and maybe that's something to look at. Do we want to have tribal flags or some representation of our Native American student population to celebrate their culture and where they're coming from? Because I could see where if you come into an institution where you see a celebration of other culture and yours is not celebrated in some capacity, where you feel that you're somewhat slighted or you feel that you're not welcome there. And then it's also, if you have these students on campus, engaging them in discussion and bringing them to the table and saying, we support you and we want to support you and we want to make sure that you're celebrated. So let's learn about your culture. Let's dive right into it and see what type of things we can do as a campus to celebrate Native American culture and individual tribal culture. So I think that's definitely an area to look at in terms of student success and how we can make our students feel welcome on campus, specifically our Native American students. Then looking at sort of external from the readings today, or for this unit, I was looking at an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education from January of this year that is entitled "Fighting Long Odds," and it's about 4 students from the Blackfoot Nation who are attending the University of Montana, so a very large state institution, and the type of trouble that they're having in terms of their engagement on campus and their interactions with other students, and what they're used to in their culture with the communal assistance in terms of their learning and being educated, and having their families involved in that, and having the entire tribe involved in that. And then you go to an institution where it is very individualized and you have to be self-motivated, and these students haven't really had that experience before. So now not only are they sort of behind in terms of just simply the perception of who they are, but from a pedagogical standpoint and how content is delivered and how they're succeeding, they're somewhat disadvantaged in that the support systems that culturally and tribally have been in place are no longer there. So that's something that I think needs to be thought about, and that this article really focuses on. It also talks about the disparity in population of Native American students who actually do attend post-secondary institutions. Looking at the numbers from 18 to 24, the demographic of 18 to 24 traditional college undergraduate age students, there is only 1 in 4 American Indian or Alaska Native students who attend and begin at least some form of post-secondary institution. This is not meaning completion, but even entering into them, 1 in 4, which is the lowest population, the lowest percentage of any minority group nationwide. So that's something that I don't think a lot of people know and a lot of people wouldn't think about. But this population, in essence, probably needs the most assistance and to be looked at in terms of bridging that gap of the number who are entering into institutions of higher education. And then finally, I think it's understanding reservation culture. There's and I've seen some of this firsthand, having lived very close to multiple to 2 Indian reservations when I was working in Connecticut, and then with my brother's wife now, and seeing this culture where there's some disdain there. There's not a ton of upward mobility in terms of education and in terms of jobs that are outside of the reservation. There's a tremendous amount of alcohol and drug abuse. There's a lot of disparity in wealth, and in terms of government support and tribal sovereignty, the dynamic that exists there. So recognizing those factors coming in that are risk factors for these students automatically, and how we can support them. So I think looking at this population, it's definitely very eye-opening. I didn't even think prior to reading and doing some of this different research, I hadn't thought about the real size and the context that exists for these students, and how they may be some of our most disenfranchised students, even though when it comes up in conversation, I think they tend to sort of be on the back burner, not even considered as a minority student group. So I think that it really is important for us to put systems into place that support the sort of communal development of these students, the cultural and different aspects of their being that may differ from the traditional student, and how we can support them and provide different resources to support what it is that is important to them, the same way that we do for students who take that more traditional route and the individualized route versus the sort of communal approach. So I think that's a few different things about the Native American culture, and I would absolutely love to maybe discuss this more with any of you and see what your thoughts are and ideas for how we can engage these students and provide resources so that they are on an even keel with all other students, regardless of what their racial or ethnic background is. So I do look forward to the discussion. Thank you guys for listening, and I look forward to hearing your feedback on the populations that you work with. Thanks a lot. Talk to you all soon.